Hi, you're listening to the Content Sells Podcast, the show all about how to create content to attract, convert, and keep your ideal clients. Welcome to episode 232. I'm Suzi Dafnis, and here with me is my co-host, Michelle Falzon. Hey, Michelle, how are you?
Well, hello there, Suzi. I'm doing really well. Thank you for asking. I am looking forward to today very, very much. We're doing a couple of back-to-back guest episodes.
Yeah, so if you didn't already catch the last episode, we had a wonderful episode all about some of the changes that are happening in email. And today we are talking about a topic that I'm very interested in personally, and I'm sure that anybody considering starting or growing a podcast will absolutely love what our guest has to say. So today's guest hosts the $100 MBA Show, which is a popular podcast that helps business owners learn how to start, grow, and scale their own business with short, actionable lessons based on real-world experience. His name is Omar Zenhom. He's the founder and host of the show, and it was Apple's Best of 2014 podcast. He's had 200 million downloads to the show and has recorded over 2,400 episodes over the last almost 10 years. The show is ranked as a top business podcast in over 30 countries. Omar is also the founder of Webinar Ninja, which is a leading webinar software for business owners, which he founded also in 2014. And over 3 million people have attended a webinar on Webinar Ninja, and it was named as one of the fastest growing SaaS companies in 2018. And it was announced just a few months ago in early 2024 that Webinar Ninja was acquired by ProProfs. So let's go ahead and get Omar on the show. Hi, Omar. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And it's exciting to share my story, share what I can to help everybody listening.
Well, thank you. This is a great topic, and I know it's one that our listeners will delight in learning more about, especially from someone who's had the success that you have had with podcasting. So just to kick us off, even though we've just introduced you, I'd love, in your words, for you to tell us about your show, when it started, how it came about, number of downloads, anything that you can give us a context into what was it and what has it become for you.
Sure. So I am the host and co-founder of the $100 MBA Show. We started the podcast in August of 2014. And I always like to say we started with 0 downloads. We started with 0 listeners, 0 email subscribers, just like everybody starts at 0. And today, which is 9.5 years later, we have around 2 million, a little over 2 million downloads a month. Over 250 million downloads in total over the last, 9.5 years. And our goal really is to help as many entrepreneurs grow a better business, business that they're proud of, but also that stays around for as long as possible to sustain a great life.
I love a couple of things about what you just said. One, it's been 9.5 years. So as you're listening to these statistics, Omar said he started with 0 and has built it to this. And so there was a second thing, but it's just escaped my mind. Maybe it'll come back. As you've grown the business and you've grown, the show, what are some of the key elements of the podcast that you believe took it from good to great? And how have you incorporated these key elements that make a great podcast into the show?
Yeah, a lot of the things that I create that has any kind of success start with a failure. So the $100 MBA Show wasn't our first podcast. And I say us because Nicole, who's my wife, is also my business partner. We created a podcast that was called People Who Know Their SHIT. And it was an interview. It was an interview podcast. And unfortunately, the podcast didn't do very well. It didn't, move the needle. Actually, I was getting more people to view my blog posts than listen to my podcast episodes. I think the best podcast episode we had was like 400 downloads an episode, and it was Gary Vaynerchuk. It was like the best guest we had, and and we really tried. We did like I believe it was about 60 episodes or so. But I think to answer your question, one of the things that we did that really helped us tremendously is get honest with ourselves. Nicole and I were driving from San Diego at the time to New York. We were driving across country. We're very early on in the podcasting world. We didn't make a lot of money. Nicole had a video gig. She was a videographer in New York. So we decided to drive across the country. And in that drive, all you got is open road. And you're just discussing, like, why is this not working? Why is this podcast just really not resonating with people. The thing we did is we really got honest about who are the best podcasters in business. We looked at the top business podcasts. We have people like Jordan Harbinger at the time was Art of Charm, and he literally podcasted before the iPhone. He started back in 2006 or something like that. You had Tim Ferriss, who has like 4 best, New York Times bestseller books. All this guy does is win. Like, how am I actually gonna compete with him? How am I gonna compete with Pat Flynn, which has an adoring fans and people have loved him for years? And you just sometimes have to ask yourself these hard questions, because sometimes you're just trying to hang with, the best, or try to do like everybody else. And you don't really differentiate yourself, and you don't really focus on your strengths. And what I realize is that, I'm a former educator. I'm a teacher by trade. I taught 5 classes a day, 5 days a week, or I used to do 5 matinees a day to my students. But basically, I have a master's in education. I am probably a better teacher than all these other podcasters. I shouldn't be doing interviews. I should be teaching on the podcast. And I realized in that moment, we need to start leveraging our strengths instead of trying to do what everybody else is doing. So that's when we came up with the $100 MBA show. We have a program called the $100 MBA that helps people build the foundation, building blocks to build a great business. And we started to just create business lessons. So we got this concept because Nicole loves language learning podcasts. So she listens to a podcast called Coffee Break French and Coffee Break Spanish. And it's like lessons on how to learn Spanish. And we just thought, I was really doing this in business. You hear a lot of like banter kind of, podcasts or interview podcasts. And I love to teach. It's my area of comfort and strength. I know how to take difficult or complex concepts and break it down. My paycheck relied on it when I was teaching. So I had to learn how to do that. So that is where we started to focus on. And we just really took it seriously and started the $100 MBA show. So that's kind of, I would say, is that number one is know your differentiator, know your value. What value, unique value can you add to your marketplace? I always give this example of like, if I wanted to be a travel blogger, one of my favorite countries to visit is Thailand. One of my favorite countries to visit is like Japan. All these are great countries, but I don't speak Japanese. I don't know the culture. It's my passion, but it's not a really good place to focus on. I could be more valuable by starting with a country like Egypt, because my parents are Egyptian. I've been to Egypt 12 times. I know how to speak Arabic. I know how to haggle. I know where all the tourist traps are, right? I don't love it, but that's where I could be the most valuable. So that's kind of my first piece of advice to anybody who's starting a podcast is like, where can you add the best value in your marketplace?
That's really interesting, because this podcast, we have 2 podcasts. This podcast that I do with Michelle is very educational. Every lesson is pretty much a little marketing lesson. And a few times a year, we bring on fabulous guests like we're doing here today. My other podcast, Her Business, started off being interviews. Something I love to do is interview. And then I started thinking, oh, you know what? You really should be educating. And I started going down that route. And I find those episodes so much more difficult than when I'm having an inspiring conversation, which someone who I feel like I can share with my audience and extract the value from them and translate it to my audience. And so I think the key for me here is that what you said is, what are your strengths? What is it that is you're going to bring the most value to, not what you think you should be doing or what others in your space are doing? Because if my genius zone is interviews and someone else is educating, we can both have fabulously popular podcasts in the same niche, but we're both bringing our strengths. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I would just add to answer your question a little bit more completely. A lot of people start podcasts because they think it's like a good marketing channel. They think it's a good thing to kind of drive traffic to their website. It's maybe a thought like, I don't want to do YouTube, so I'll do podcasting. Seems easier to produce. My advice to people like that is, you're not wrong. Like, that could help you, but it's going to cost you as much time and effort to do it properly as much as you are just trying to see this as some sort of marketing hack. Like, when I started a podcast, I wanted to be one of the best podcasts out there. Mm-hmm. And when you have that intention, you start to do things differently. Like, for example, I got a speaking coach. I got a voice coach. I now started to see myself as a part of the media. Started thinking like, why is Breaking Bad such a great show? right? They don't have to worry about getting advertisers because there's such a great show. Like they're gonna be able to syndicate. They're able to get, so how do we deconstruct that and do that in podcasting? Because that's what the best podcasts do. Like a lot of us, we want to have a great podcast, but we don't want to do the things that great podcasts do. And that for me, it's like, just take it seriously. A lot of us were afraid to take something seriously because we're afraid to fail or we're afraid to kind of have to change and become something that we're not. But that's what I love about entrepreneurship, is that it's like the best personal development program ever, because it makes you become who you need to be to get to the success you want to have. Often I look at my goals, I look at like what I want to be, and I got to be honest. I right now am not who the person that can pull that off. I need to change. I need to improve. I got to be a better person. I got to do different things to be able to get those results. And that would be just my advice to anybody, because I know that a lot of people, they want to start a podcast and they're kind of like, hey, this could be a cool thing to get traffic, things like that. But you're going to put in the hours anyway. You might as well invest and do it as, give it your all, is what I would say.
Thank you.
Such great advice. And, the direction of today's show is about how to make money from our podcast, how to monetize our podcast. And you've touched on two really important things already. Firstly, have something that delivers value. Focus on where can I deliver the most value in my market? Because if you ain't delivering the value, it's hard to get the value back, right? So I love that. And the second thing you've really started touching on is really being specifically for people, creating great content, doing the things great podcasters do so that you'll get the people coming to your show. And then a lot of things kind of take care of themselves from there. And so I want to ask you, millions of listeners a month. Firstly, congratulations.
Thank you.
That is not something that everybody that goes into podcasting does. And you don't have to have millions of listeners a month to be able to make money from your podcast and have it be a valuable part of your equation. But I'd love to know, what specific strategies or tactics have you found, above and beyond like creating a great show, that are effective in attracting and retaining listeners to the $100 MBA show?
I'm a big believer that there are really no new ideas. Like everything's a remix. Like everything I've done has already been done before in another industry. Like when somebody creates a movie, they don't just create the movie and they just say, okay, it's playing in theaters. There's a lot of marketing involved. There's a lot of commercials. There's trailers. There's junkets. They're doing interviews on every single talk show. They're doing all this stuff to bring awareness to this one movie that's going to last maybe in the theaters for 6 weeks, and then it's going to go to the the streaming market or the DVD market back in the day, right? So the same applies for podcasting, is that like, as much as you work on your podcast and make it incredibly valuable, like you said, like this doesn't matter if your podcast stinks. And I proved it with my bad podcast that failed, right? It stunk. No one wanted to listen to it. And so the content has to be great. And of course, it's going to be hard to be great at the gate, but you got to start somewhere. And I always say that if you don't have cringeworthy work, then you started too late. Yes. And I can't listen to my first 100 episodes. It's horrendous, right? But I had to start somewhere. And that's fine. You'll get better. But the point is that as much as you work hard on the podcast itself, you have to work on getting listeners to the podcast. That means getting on other podcasts and doing interviews like this. That means running ads. That means doing marketing. That means being aware of who else is in the market and trying to maybe do some collaborations, go to conferences, go to meetups, do retreats, figure out how you can get on stages. Like this is what, I don't know, The Rock does. This is what the famous actors do when they have a movie release. And you want to do that the same with podcasting. But we all have limited budgets. When I got started with the $100 MBA show, this is literally what we did. I wanted to get in front of as many listeners as possible. And I wanted to make sure that I interacted with my listeners so that I understand what they're about and understand the language they use so I can use that in my copy and all that kind of stuff. Nicole and I at the time were living in San Diego in California, and we had this like big esky, and we had a whiteboard in our office, and I told Nicole, hey, let's grab this whiteboard, let's grab this esky, and let's just go and hit the streets. We went to the supermarket, we filled the esky with ice and a bunch of soft drinks. We had a white like whiteboard and wrote in markers, free cold drink for iTunes love. Back in the day, podcasts are on iTunes. And this is 2014. So like 75% of the people didn't know what a podcast was. So we actually called it business lessons. And then what we did is we held the sign on the boardwalk of San Diego Mission Beach. And we just stood there while people walking by. They saw the sign, like, you're giving out free soft drinks. Like, yeah. And we open the cooler, choose what you want. You want orange soda, you want root beer, you want Coca-Cola, whatever it is, right? And as they're opening it up and enjoying their soda, I said, hey, do you ever think about starting a business? They're like, oh yeah, I always had a dream to start a business. I wanted to make my own muffins, whatever it is. Like, well, we actually have a podcast, it teaches business lessons on how to start your own business and how to grow and how to market. Do you have your phone on you? Yes, pull it out. They pull the phone out. Like, this is the podcast app. Click on this podcast app. Search the $100 MBA Show. They searched it. I had them subscribe. I said, hey, give it a listen. If you like it, give us a review. It'd be awesome. And I think and that law of reciprocity is real. Somebody just walked away with a free cold drink. They're going to listen to your show. They may or may not review, but we did that. And we spoke to like 200 people that day. But who's going to do that? Who's going to actually put themselves out there and talk to strangers and give out drinks like you're some sort of, street performer, right? I did that because I want to win, right? And the thing is that people have to realize that sometimes when you're on a budget, we didn't have any money, you're going to have to do things people are not willing to do. Legal things, of course. But the point here is that you got to put yourself out there. If you're not willing to talk to strangers and be proud of what you built, then maybe you need to consider, going into something else, because that's what business is about. It's about saying, hey, I have something of value. I want to show it to people. And by the way, this is free. A podcast is free. You're not even selling anything. And we were giving away something in exchange for them listening to a podcast. But that's just a small example. We did many small kind of gritty things like that, guerrilla marketing kind of stuff, because we really just had to use what we got. And what we had was, we thought we had a great show, and we thought that we had our own, ability to talk to people. And by the way, like, a lot of people don't realize you are lucky. If you are in a country where you speak the language and you have communication skills and you have all your limbs and you have the health to do this, like, you have so much going for you that you can use that a lot of us just take for granted. A lot of people are not functioning like that. I know that because my mother and my father came from Egypt. They went to a country they didn't know the language. They didn't know anything. They don't know how to get a haircut. They don't know how to get their driver's license. They had to figure everything out. Plus, they had to do their degree all over again because they didn't recognize the degree in Egypt so they can get a job. So, like, I have it easy. This is easy. I know how to do everything. I know how to speak the language. I know how to communicate. So giving out some sodas for some iTunes love was eeasy.
I love that story. I can just see you two doing that with your esky and your and your soda. I love what you said earlier about being serious. And I think that this audience that we're talking to today, we're business owners. So if we're going to invest our time and energy in starting a podcast and growing a podcast, then it has to make sense. That investment in time and energy and resources and team members and production and all that has to make sense. So let's talk about monetization, which is something that for many podcasters, I know especially for women business owners who don't have big audiences or big listenerships, it can feel a little intimidating. Can you share how you initially approached taking this beautiful asset that you were creating and actually monetizing it, and what you would recommend we do if we're just starting out? Not just starting out with a podcast, but starting out in monetization. Yeah. Yeah.
So I can share what we did, and then I can maybe share some advice on if you're in a different situation and how to do that. So when we started the $100 MBA Show, we took a big gamble. Like, we actually said no to client work, and we said no to any kind of work because we wanted to focus and make this show incredible. We actually batched about, I think a month's worth of episodes beforehand. We re-recorded.
Is it daily, weekly? What is it?
So it was daily for about 7 years, and now it's 3 days a week because we have such a big back catalog. So we now it's 3 days a week. So at the time we had about a month batched, and then we re-recorded like the first 10 episodes like 5 times each because we're just not happy with the quality. But our focus was like, hey, we're gonna give this 2 months and just work on this podcast, on making it as good as possible, marketing it as much as we can, as hard as we can. And that's what we did, because we really believed if we had something of value, then monetizing it will be easy. And that's really the bottom line. It's like, whether you have a podcast or a course or a YouTube channel, or you're looking to get people's attention and turn that into dollars, what you're providing, if it's great, it's is like half the battle. I would say it's about 80% of the battle. So that's really what we focused on. And we didn't have any ads. We didn't have any sponsorship for the first, I would say, 300 episodes. We're at episode 2,400 now, but we're first 300 episodes. We got the show up to 10,000 downloads an episode before we got our first advertiser. And we got approached by SiriusXM, which is our agent now, and we work with SiriusXM, and they've been our partner since, you know, the first year. But the point here is that like that was our approach, is like we want to create something great. We took a big gamble. By the way, we didn't have any money. Like we were not living it up. We were, you know, struggling to make rent and all that kind of stuff. But we really believed in this. So like we dedicated to make it a great show, and then as the show grew, it got attention, and then we were able to monetize it through sponsorship. Mind you, in the meantime, before that, we have a program called the $100 MBA with the same name, and that drove traffic and drove awareness to our course, which is $100. It's not expensive, but you have to remember that somebody who's consuming your podcast, they're going to need to listen at least, I would say, you know, to 5 to 10 episodes to build a relationship with you. It's a very intimate kind of medium, but you still have to kind of, it's a slow burn. You know, I always say that if you're going to start a podcast, kind of at least give yourself 2 years, because it takes a while to get that momentum, but it's actually very sticky after a while, because podcast listeners are quite completionists. They like to listen to the whole episode. They like to listen to the next episode. They kind of have their shows that they love. So we use the show to kind of talk about some of the lessons that we teach inside of the $100 MBA program, and that kind of helped a little bit, kind of driving traffic and getting to our website and people signing up for that. But I would say that the biggest driver for us for monetizing the podcast, besides sponsorship, because that's kind of our biggest one right now, but it was just awareness of who we are as a brand, as like my personal brand and what I do. And because I have a podcast talking about business lessons, I would teach a lot of the things I was learning along the way, building my own business. And, you know, at the time, for over 9 years, I was building my software business, Webinar Ninja, which we recently exited. But right now, you know, I still teach the lessons of what I've learned through that experience. So that organically kind of helped us become the listener was aware of like the product and what we sold and what we were doing. It also gave a little bit more of authenticity. There's a lot of people that teach business that don't actually run a business that is outside of teaching business. So it kind of gives you a little bit of authority of like, hey, I screwed up here. I made a bad hire. It cost me this much money. Here's some lessons I've learned. Don't do these mistakes that I did. And, you know, yeah, it's kind of hard to fall on your face, but at the same time, it helped me, you know, bring awareness to the product itself, Webinar Ninja. So those are kind of one of the ways that I monetize. I know there's some people like to use like affiliate commissions and things like that. My advice to somebody who is got a small audience, is growing their audience slowly and wants to monetize, is ask yourself, is it absolutely necessary? First of all, like, do you actually need to monetize? If you need to eat, okay, do it. If you don't need to eat, then just focus on the value of the podcast and make it better. The reason why I say this is because I'm a big believer in focus. If it's hard to focus on something until you're a master at something, then you can add on other things. So like once the show gets to a certain level and you know how to make it great, then you can say, okay, let me see how I can monetize it. Now, if you want to monetize it, I like to say it's best to monetize not just the show alone. It's good to say, hey, to package your sponsorship to people. So for example, like I'll give you a spot on the show, as well as in my newsletter. You'll get a little section in my newsletter. I'll give you a few things on social media, on Twitter, on Instagram, and maybe if you have a YouTube channel, you know, I'll give you a shout out there as well. So you're kind of combining your audiences. So now you have more value to offer the sponsor. I sponsor other creators to grow the show. So this is very attractive to me as a sponsor myself. So because one, when you have a small audience, it's a lot more of an intimate audience, and they're very responsive. Like we track this data. We use a tool called Chartable. So when for example, I'm a sponsor on the 100 MBA shows doing ads on another show or on a newsletter or things like that, we track conversions. And actually the smaller the audience, the higher the conversion. So maybe you're not getting a lot of clicks, but the conversions off those clicks are pretty powerful. So that is very appealing to smaller brands. It's also appealing to bigger brands as well. And don't shortchange yourself. Like, don't see yourself as like, oh, I don't have thousands of people. You're still getting them customers. You're still getting them awareness. So I like the idea of packaging your assets or your exposure to different assets for that brand so that you can be able to monetize your podcast.
I love, you said so much there. I love the idea that, once you had 15,000, then you can have an agency that sells ads. You also sold your own course. You also figured out how to package and put together a number of different media assets to make it more valuable. In selling your own course or lead generating, I'm just thinking for small audiences who may not get to the 15,000, something that's attractive to an agency. It's two things you said. One is that maybe a small list is a good list. I would rather have a small list of my ideal clients than, a blanket approach anytime that I'm doing a strategic alliance with someone. But also, did you find it more valuable to sell your own products and services through your own channel, or did the income from the advertising far outweigh what you thought you could produce by selling your back-end programs?
If I'm choosing, you're going to make more money on sponsorship, just because if your show is big enough, if you're getting more exposure, sponsorship is just more lucrative. And it's let me just put it this way. Let's say, what's your favorite show, Suzi?
My favorite podcast show?
Or no, your show on TV, like your favorite show on TV.
RuPaul's Drag Race.
Okay, so imagine RuPaul, instead of doing RuPaul's Drag Race and having the great show that you love, was like forcing product placement every 5 minutes and said, you got to buy these pumps from, Jimmy Choo. It's great, beautiful, like whatever you can buy right here. It's in the description below. And then went on for the show, right? It's still going to be a good show. You'll enjoy it, but not as much as if it was just pure RuPaul giving his best self, right? And that's why it makes more money, is because they're tuning in for the show, and it doesn't matter how many ads are on there, or not how many, but how frequently you visit this kind of idea of having sponsorship. You're gonna have great content because people love the show, because you're focusing on the show. The reason why we went down the agency route is because we have friends like John and Kate who run Entrepreneurs on Fire. They do their they kind of run their show, and they reach out their own sponsors, and they have an agency as well. But the point is that like I love their model, and they're really hard workers. But Nicole and I decided we just want to focus on the content of the show. We're happy for our agency to take the cut, because it's just a lot of work to do that. Now, if you, like you said, if you're not at that level, it's okay. There's a lot of people that are hungry for smaller audiences. I'm one of those people. Like, if you have a great audience and you're in the business space, find me on social media. I want to sponsor your show because it's a great way to reach new audiences. But you can't just wait for people to reach out to you. You have to make the effort to network, to get to know people. One of the things I love to do is I love going to conferences. I love meeting people, because then I follow up on social media. I send them DMs. I get to know them. And I do this because I want to know what they're doing, what they're building. So maybe later on I can help them and sponsor their show or sponsor their thing. And then I can get exposure from my podcast. But the vice versa is also applicable. Like, when you launch something, you might be saying, hey, awesome people at Wistia that I met at my conference, you guys got a great video platform, and I have business owners that use video marketing. Do you want to sponsor my show? And obviously, with your modest rates, given the fact that you're getting started, they're going to be happy to be championing the small guy or championing the small gal as they're building their business and their show. So it's not going to happen by accident. It's just like the esky and the whiteboard. You have to go out there and you have to meet people, and you got to talk to people, and you have to make those connections so that when there are opportunities for you to reach out and say, hey, is this a good fit for you? And you might get a no, but it's a numbers game. You just keep on talking to people.
Thank you.
Omar, you've just answered like several of our questions already. Just such comprehensive answers. So I want to kind of pick up on the sponsorship piece. I know exactly what you mean about ads. You're listening to a show, and there's one show I have in my mind in particular a podcast show. I absolutely love it, but they just have a crazy amount of ads, and they don't just do it at the start. They do it like 3 times through the show as well. And I've come to know the duration of these ad breaks, right? I know if I hit the forward 30-second button 4 times and one 15-second button back, I'm going to skip the ad block.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just making my life harder. I'm not hearing
Right.
the ad anymore. So if I'm doing it, heaps of other people are doing it. And so the advertiser, may not be getting the bang for the buck in that case. So I loved what you were saying about making sure the show's great and there's this balance between sponsorship content and your content and all those things. I'm curious, you've given us a couple of great tips around sponsorship, maybe when you might be ready to start, or you can do it yourself, or you can use an agency. I'd love to dig into some of the nitty gritty. Like, what have you done that's maybe a thing you would never do again around getting people to pay to advertise on your show? Or what's something you're doing right now that you're just loving and you're like, this is a great strategy that people could be implementing?
Yeah. So podcast sponsorships has changed a lot over the years. Actually, the technology has changed. The way you get paid gets changed. The flip side or the upside for the sponsor is different. Prior to maybe 3 or 4 years ago, the only way advertising was sold was per mila, which would basically mean per 1,000 downloads. And you would just show your numbers. This is how much I get. And they would say, okay, let's say, for example, you're getting 10,000 downloads. So then we're going to pay you per 1,000 downloads. So say, for example, they're paying $25, you'd get $250 for that ad spot for that episode. Okay. And these would be recorded and baked in, meaning that it would be in the actual file of the podcast. Mm-hmm. That has all changed primarily in a big way. And you'll notice that you might be getting Office Works ads in your podcast, like Australian-based ads. And this is what's called dynamic inserted ads. And this is now the new way of advertising, where basically the advertiser is only going to pay when the ad gets listened to. So when you are skipping your episode, the podcast is not getting any money for that because they didn't listen to the ad. So they know the impressions that are happening for the actual thing. So they're probably going to soon get the feedback. Okay, we need to maybe figure out when best to put these ads and how not to overload it and all that kind of stuff. So one of the things that we've experimented with is where we place these ads and how many. Now, we have a short form podcast. Our podcast is about 15 to 20 minutes long each episode. So it's not too long. So we can't really put that many ads. So what we like to do is we have a pre-roll spot, a mid-roll spot, and a post-roll. Post-roll is basically when the episode's over, there's some ads. So maybe they get listened to, maybe they don't. Some people are just avid listeners and they want to hear what I have to say about products that I endorse, and they'll listen to it. And that's fine. Why waste that airtime? It's good to have it there if they want to. Now, the pre-roll is something we experimented with, and I'm a big believer in the fact that your podcast, every time you record an episode, this is an audition for you. People are judging you very quickly. I'm talking about seconds. In the first few seconds of your episode, you need to bring it really strong, because this is where they're going to decide, is this a podcast I want to listen to? Forget about subscribing. They just want, am I going to listen to this episode, right? So a lot of people, they front load their ads, and it's a little bit annoying until you get to the content. They have these really, big, bodacious kind of intros, like, from the top of the mountains of Colorado, here's Jimmy, the podcaster. And then Jimmy comes in. It's like, hi guys, I'm Jimmy. And it doesn't even match the energy or anything like that. But it's like, do they really need this, 3, 4, 5 seconds of intro every single time? So I'm a big believer is like, what we actually do, we have a broadcast clock for the 100 MBA, and basically it's like what we do each minute or each actually second of the episode. And in the beginning of the episode, we introduce the show. In today's lesson, you will learn. That's what we say very early on in the episode, so they know what's in it for them, why they should. And then after we say that, we say why it's important to listen to it. So it's like, in today's lesson, you're going to learn how to offboard a team member. This is really important because it could be a real security threat if you offboard somebody wrong, or maybe they'll come back later on and you want to make sure you part with them in the right way. I made this mistake before. Don't make this mistake again. I'm going to share real practical examples how to do it. Let's get into it. Let's get down to business. That's just a real example of an episode I actually recorded today. But the point is that immediately the listener's saying, okay, I know why I should stick around. So that's really important for us to have that at the top before anything else, because then they're sold and they're like, okay, I'm willing to wait another few seconds if there's an ad, there's something going on. So your placement matters, but also just understanding that your number one stakeholder is the listener, not the advertiser, not your bank account, not anything else. You have to make sure the listener is satisfied and that they're going to listen to your episode, at least to the point where they feel like they're getting value. So I like to front load as much value as possible and then continue to deliver throughout the episode so that they feel like, okay, this show's actually delivering on what they say. One of the things I always tell people is that whatever your episode title is, this is not a title. This is a promise. You're promising people they're going to learn this. They're going to, change their mind about this thing, or they're going to have a new perspective on a new topic. If you don't deliver on that title, you are breaking your promise and you're never going to get that listener again. And you don't know when your new listener is listening. So every time I step up to the mic and record the podcast, I'm aware of the fact that there's probably somebody going to listen to this episode listen to my podcast for the first time with this episode. So they're making a judgment on my podcast. So it's got to be the best episode ever made, because I want to put my best foot forward so that they can continue to listen to the next episode and the next episode. And to be very honest, that's not an easy thing to do, because when you're recording, 2,400 episodes, you have to find a way to kind of think, okay, how do I become better? How do I, it could be something small, like how do I, make sure that I'm adding a little humor or giving more interesting stories or giving examples that are relevant? How do I make sure that I, be as succinct as possible with a topic, or maybe not tackle a topic that's so big that I can't cover it in a short amount of time? So yeah, that's something that I really strive for, and I like to tell people to try to get the people's attention and get them hooked in as early as possible.
Maybe this is part of your being an educator, but I just love the structure. Like, you're not just going to meander until you've said everything you want to say. You've got a very clear, it needs to be done in this time. You've got your syntax. We do like a cold open, and then it goes to the jingle, and then I do this and that. That is so important. I think when a lot of people start, they think, oh, it's an open mic, I'm just going to talk, say something really interesting, and that's going to build a great show. And what you're showing us evidence of is that good shows, just like a good TV show, they have a syntax and a structure and a lot of thought, and it's scripted, and it still sounds natural, but there's purpose in everything that you're doing. And this is why you have, such a successful podcast. When you're, because you said that you just exited from your business, you still have this fabulous business, which is the podcast, and sustaining and growing that podcast revenue has, as you've already demonstrated, taken strategy, adaptability, and such a big commitment. If there are any other lessons that you've learned about maintaining and increasing the monetization opportunities of the show that you could share with us?
Yeah, I think it's important to think about not only what you do, but what you don't do. So, for example, when it comes to sponsorship, there's just certain sponsors we have to say no to, just because it's not a good fit for our audience. We're not going to say yes to gambling sites. We're not going to say yes to even dog food. People have dogs, but we're a business podcast, and it makes more sense for us to showcase things like Google Email or Squarespace or a CPA kind of service or something like that. Something that actually would be helpful. And we're in a good space because there are a lot of tools like that. But the point here is that I see the ads as a part of the show. I see this as a chance for us to give more value. And the reason why I see it that way is because I want them to listen, because I want to get paid. So if the ads are not relevant, they're not going to listen to it. And so sometimes you got to say no to some big sponsors, that really are well-named brands. Probably you see them around your hometown all the time, big franchises, things like that. But if they're not aligned with who you are and your brand and what you're doing for your audience, you're almost like a parent. You got to make sure you provide your audience what's best for them. So those are some difficult choices you have to make along the way. But also, one of the things I want to say is, I think a lot of people, they start a podcast with this idea that I want to grow my audience, which is fantastic. But you have to be conscious of the fact that, who do you want listening? What audience do you want listening? Do you want people that are okay with mediocre content, are okay with maybe things they've heard before, or maybe you're creating content that's for beginners, but your product is for advanced people? If you have a coaching program that is, $50,000 a year, and you're teaching people how, to validate a business idea, that is really tough, because most people don't have $50,000 laying around. if they want to start a business. Usually those people are advanced entrepreneurs that have made, 6 and 7 figures and are willing to invest that money because they've invested money in the past and gotten a return. So think about the content you're creating and think about who you're attracting, because what you want to do is make sure that on the top of your funnel and your, value ladder or sales funnel, that your podcast is bringing in the right people, so that when it leads to the next thing, whether it's your product, your course, your book, it's attracting the right people so that they don't get disappointed. A lot of people have disgruntled customers is because they have not very good product market fit. They bring in the wrong people, and then they read your book. They're like, this is not for me. I thought this was about this, And it's not like your content is bad. It's just that bad for that person. So just be conscious of who you're attracting. And the best way to think about this is like, who would be the perfect customer for me for my flagship product or whatever it is? What are their pain points? What are their problems? What keeps them up at night? I need to create content around those things, and that will attract those people.
I'm going to ask a question that has sort of just popped into my head, Omar, and that is because if I think about our shows, it's probably unlikely that we will ever put third-party ads in them. But one of the things we do want to do is generate emails. So we want to build the audience so we can generate emails, so then we can promote our membership and our masterminds and our retreats and all those sorts of things. Have you ever used the show for lead generation for either the business that you just exited or other programs? And how did that work for you?
Yeah, so 100%. I'm a big fan of email marketing. I think as our attention spans get shorter, as social media gets busier, our inboxes are really the most sacred place on the internet. Like, you have to deal with email. You can't just like flick through it like a newsreel, right? You have to, or a news feed. You have to, archive it, read it, delete it, do something. You can't just ignore it. And if you have access to somebody's inbox, you have really special access. So that's really great that you're focusing on that. And I would, recommend that to anybody who's listening. One of the things I want to just remind people of is like, what are they already sold on? A lot of us, what we try to do is let's say, for example, I have a podcast, and then on the podcast I say, hey, sign up for my free checklist or sign up for my ebook, whatever, at this thing, right? It's a little bit of a reach for them to do that, to get off the podcast app and then go and remember and do this. But if it's linked to something they're already sold on, like the podcast, like they're listening to the podcast now. They like your podcast. They like you. They like listening to you. So a better opt-in would be like, get our top 5 episodes delivered to your inbox, right? Because they're already sold on it, and they're like, okay, great. I want to listen to the best episodes, the most popular ones. Or, if you're just getting started here, we have a starter pack. I learned this from Jordan Harbinger, where you create these playlists in Spotify, and you could just send them, here's a starter pack of the episodes you should start with. And then they go ahead and get started with that. They're on your email, but you're actually giving them something that they're more likely to say yes to, because they're already sold on that. So that's kind of a nice way to convert them off a podcast.
I like that. So, Michelle, maybe we'll say, if you enjoyed today's episode, we can send you our top 3 episodes about podcasting. Yeah. Very good. I really like that. I like that, making it relevant. And you're right. It is a bit of an ask. It's like, stop here, go find something, get out of this app, go to a different app. Thank you so much. This has been terrific. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with?
No, I just wish everybody well as they're, striving through their business. I mentioned this when we met last week at the event that we were running, that if you're in business, if you're building a business, if you're an entrepreneur, you're my kind of person, you're somebody who's willing to fight for your dreams. It's a privilege really to be able to build a business and be a business owner. So, don't take that for granted. It's a great opportunity for you to learn and to grow and to give value to other people, but also enjoy it. Enjoy the fact that you get to do what you want and you get to create the things that you want to create. And you get to make a podcast. You get to have a newsletter. It's an incredible experience. And if you don't believe me, ask somebody who was an entrepreneur and now is in a job. Ask them how much they miss it, how much they miss the creativity and the growth and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I just want to kind of cheer everybody on and remind them of the great opportunity they're in. If you found me of value in any way and you're curious about other things I can teach you, then we have a podcast called the $100 MBA Show, and you can subscribe and check it out.
Great. And we'll put links to all that right alongside this episode. Omar, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Michelle, I really loved that conversation. Such a clear communicator, great educator, all those things, but also what Omar said was just so useful, I thought.
Yeah, look, he's so focused. I think you used that word when speaking with him as well. And, I've had the good fortune to know him for some time. And every time he speaks, it's like he's quiet and methodical, but he's just dropping truth bombs left and right. When Omar talks, you just kind of get quiet and listen.
So there's a couple of things that I want to recount that we heard in today's episode that I think are especially relevant for women business owners who are looking to use a podcast to grow their business. And one of the first things that Omar said was about getting honest about our strengths, getting honest on what the purpose is of the podcast, getting honest on what it is that you're trying to do, because this is an exchange of your time and energy to put into something. And as small business owners, we don't have, even those who are not small businesses, we don't have this excess of time sitting around. It's like, what will I do? Well, I'll pour hours every month into a podcast. But the idea of getting really honest, what are we doing here? And we heard the story of how he and Nicole got really honest. They got honest about their strengths. They took a failure in the first podcast and said, you know what? We're not doing what is our genius. Let's do what our genius is, and brought into the show their experience with education and translating complex information for business owners and getting really clear on their ideal client. I loved all that.
Yeah, and it's so in line with what we talk about here on the show about staying in your lane. And, you don't have to do what your competitors are doing. And oftentimes the real value is in zigging when everyone else is zagging. And so just owning your own niche, which we've talked about just recently in a recent show, and owning your own strengths is always, I think, the key, whether it's a podcast, whether it's you making a new product, whether it's your new business idea, whether it's who you're going for as your ideal client. I just think we cannot hear this too many times. And I loved in particular the get honest piece, just like really brutally honest with what you want and what your strengths are. So I thought it was a great point. The other one that I thought was a great point right out of the gate and sort of just kept coming back all the way through the interview was, look, yes, we want to monetize. Yes, we want to find opportunities with whether it's sponsors or affiliate links or selling our own product or all the myriad ways that we could possibly monetize our podcast. But at the base of it, just make a great show. And he was obsessive about it. They did nothing for the first 2 months except make a great show, make a whole batch of episodes, market it like crazy, get out in the streets and do the things that other people aren't prepared to do. And that, I think, speaks volumes as to why he started at 0 and now he's at 2 million downloads a month. People started 10 years ago at 0 and maybe don't even have a podcast anymore or struggling along with very little listenership. So I loved what he said about just make a great show and the allusion to TV shows. And one little thing he said that I picked up on was, and he said, and great TV shows are scripted. And, he's very deliberate about every minute of his listeners' time. And that's something that, Suzi, you and I are very deliberate about as well. We do script our shows and we talk about this in a recent episode 225, which is how we produce this podcast. And if you're interested in podcasting, that's another great companion show to go ahead and listen to alongside this great interview with Omar. But we had a little bit of pushback, which I thought was interesting. Somebody saying, well, no, it should be off the cuff, right? And if you would do it off the cuff, if that's your strength, do that. But I know the process of scripting is so it's such a good discipline, because even if you do add a few off the cuff comments or you ad lib in a few places, you've really got a very clear structure. You're not wasting people's time. You're not taking too long to get to the meat, all of those things. So I loved hearing that he does that too.
Yeah, I did too. And yeah, you can't imagine people going into a TV studio and going, well, everyone just do what you think. Here's 5 bullet points, make it up. So I really love that too. The other thing is, here we are 9.5 years on, and Omar, at our invitation, comes onto the show to talk about his show. So he's advertising it, he's building relationships, he's getting in front of the right audiences. He hasn't got an esky and, some soft drinks, but he's still hustling because it's such an important part of what he does. And I mean hustling in the best way possible. It's like he hasn't stopped promoting it simply because there's 2 million downloads every month. He's still out there saying, hey, this is a good show, building alliances. And I think that's such a good lesson for all of us, no matter what we're doing. One, it takes time. Two, you want to be relentless in your commitment to keeping things flowing, to maintaining the momentum, to not resting on our laurels. So that's something I took away, Michelle.
Gotta love it. And he has really done that. He sold it and kept selling it. He didn't give up on it. Even though the first one was not, the first podcast he did wasn't a success, he didn't give up on the medium. He, doubled down. And it's that grit that so often is the key attribute of successful people. I want to get a little tactical for a second, because he talked about dynamic inserted ads. And I wanted to just add something to that point, which was something cool that Suzi and I do with this dynamic inserted ads. So basically what Omar was saying was, it used to be, if you listen to some of our older episodes, you'll hear we're promoting an event, that happened 5 years ago, and it's hard baked into the show. Whereas now you can just have those ads appear and change them out. So we can have if we're promoting something right now, we can run that out across all our previous episodes. And then when cart closes on that, or it's no longer available, we can just turn that off. It's a fantastic innovation in the world of podcasting and the world of ads. We use a tool called Libsyn to do that. And even though, as you've heard on this episode today, and you've probably heard from the show, right, we don't have other sponsors putting their content on our show and paying us for the airtime, but you will hear us promote when our mastermind is open, or when there's an event coming up that we want you to know about. So we're thinking about inserting our own ads for our own stuff into our podcast. And I think this is just a really interesting idea for you. If you're thinking, I don't want other people's ads on my show, well, how can you think about your own ads on your own show? And there's this nice convergence, really. You're creating your content, you're creating a platform, and then you can even do these dynamic ads. Because if you've got podcast episodes if you've got, like we do hundreds of podcast episodes, somebody might be listening to episode 2 right now. We can just make sure that the ad we want them to hear today is what's in their earbuds. So I just wanted to share that.
And with Libsyn, or any platform that allows you to do the dynamic insertion of ads, there will be a cost, just in case you're wondering. I know certainly there is with Libsyn, but we have made that decision to make that investment, because when we do run those ads, they're either for lead generation, or we're opening up the doors to our mastermind program, or running some sort of course. And so while we're not advertising, for a bank or insurance company or Officeworks or whatever, we're advertising our own programs. And we found that to be worthwhile. We could get the return on investment by letting our listeners know, as Michelle said, whether they're listening to episode 2 or 200 or 27, that this is what's happening right now. And here's an opportunity for you to work more closely with us or get some added benefit. And so, highly recommend those, even if it is a paid function for you. The other thing is, and I love this quote, that the episode title is a promise. And so if you are a first-time listener, and maybe you tuned in because the episode title was How to Monetize Your Podcast, even if you don't have a huge audience, then hopefully we've delivered on that promise. But it speaks to any sort of title, whether it's a blog title, a podcast title, an event name. And we have got episodes about naming things and how to come up with great subject lines. But the key point that Omar was making was that if you're promising that this episode is about this, you don't want to do a bait and switch. You definitely want to deliver on this. And that's what's going to build that loyalty in that listener, because they came and they got exactly what they were coming for.
Yeah, he was great with the kind of really juicy one-liners. The other one I loved was every show is an audition. I thought that was a brilliant.
Yes.
So good. And so true, right? Get to the meat in anything we're doing. The last point that I wanted to kind of address was, Suzi, I was so fascinated in Omar's answer to your question about if he could choose between sponsorship or selling his own products. And he said for him, sponsorship's just a lot more lucrative. And I think when you've got 2 million downloads a month, it's kind of in some ways money for jam. I mean, it's not money for jam. He's making a great show. He's putting a lot of effort into it, but he's probably got a lot of leverage in what he can charge for those ad spots. And I think if you're just getting started, and even if you do have 2 million listeners a month, I really wanted to make a vote, though, for selling your own products as a monetization strategy on your podcast. because if you are really focused on that, and especially if you have a high ticket or a lucrative thing that you are selling, and even if you only have a few listeners, like he said, a small list is a sweet list. You can be get a high conversion from just a few listeners. Definitely think about offering your own product. I think it's all about context. I think if you've got a big podcast with lots of listeners, then it may just be much easier to just sell your ad space. But I think for a lot of us, for small business owners where you might only have a few hundred listeners a month, but they're the right people, I would be focusing on monetizing by selling my product first. And so just an additional piece of context there. But either way, that clarity around who your ideal client is and who you're serving and who you're for is going to be key to that monetization.
And this episode is in the top 10% of most listened to shows. Sorry, this show is in the top 10% of most listened to shows in its category. And so, yeah, we have great downloads, but we know that our mastermind, for instance, getting someone to join our mastermind, which a number of our masterminders came from simply listening to this show, that for us, being able to work that deeply with a person is more valuable than what we might be able to get at, $25 per 1,000 listens. At the moment. But again, it's a different game. Michelle, when we had a blog, we used to have 20 bloggers. We had an award-winning blog, and that was part of our business model. Then we used to sell ads. Then it was all about get more eyeballs to the blog and monetize the blog. It was a different game. But then when we switched and we went, okay, we've got everyone else's ads all over our website. Is that what we really want to be selling? And we said, no, we have a membership, we have a course, we have retreats, we have high-end programs, we have mentoring. That's what we really want to sell. And then we did away with that advertiser model, and the agency, we had the same agency as was mentioned here on the show, and said, no, we're going to sell our own things. And so it's really a decision for you to make as a business owner, and both work, right? Both can be lucrative, both can be your business model, but you want to just be clear about what game you're playing. So good. Thank you again to Omar Zenhom for being part of the show. Thank you for showing us best practice when it comes to a winning podcast and being a great educator and really engaging your audience and keeping your audience growing. We mentioned some links throughout today's show. We will put a link to, of course, Omar's show and any other information that he's provided for us that he would like to let you know about. And we'll give you a link to that in just a moment. But before we do that, we have over 500 five-star reviews for this show. So if you have given us a review, I want to say thank you so much. We appreciate it. One of our listeners is Suzi Jalowich. And Sue, I probably just botched up your last name. She has a business called Knit It Now, and she was listening to episode 210, which was called Retention Strategies for Membership and Recurring Revenue Businesses. And she said, I was so inspired by this podcast. I implemented 3 of the 6 strategies the same day. That is adding value, Michelle. That is good. I'm really excited. So thank you so much, Sue. And if you enjoyed this episode or any of the episodes of the show, we would love it if you would leave us a rating, a review on Apple Podcasts. It is still the big daddy. No matter where you're listening, Apple Podcasts is where most people discover the podcast they want to listen to. And we want to help as many business owners as possible. So anything we mentioned here on the show today, you can find over on the show notes, which you will find at herbusiness.com/podcast money. That's herbusiness.com/podcast money. So thanks again, Omar. Michelle, what do we have coming up in the next episode?
Well, for anyone who's listened to our episode on how we create this podcast, you will know that we line up our episodes with the content that Suzi is sharing inside of Her Business Network across each of her 8 growth zones that she kind of helps in businesses to develop skill sets in all 8 of these growth zones. Now, the next growth zone that Her Business is focusing on is money. And one big determinant of how much money you are making in your business is whether you've got the right business model. And this is a huge issue. It is something that does affect the way you market and the content you create, but it's like a structural issue. It's something that's going to, no matter how good your blog post is, no matter how good your podcast is, no matter how great you have, your course laid out on your, online course provider's platform, none of that really matters if the business model underpinning it is the wrong business model for you. Now, all kinds of business models can work. We're going to be talking about the different types of business models, especially if you are a person that is leveraging your expertise and you are packaging up your ideas into content and courses and memberships and all those things. We're going to be looking at the mistakes and the missteps that we've been seeing businesses make, and also what's made the difference, what's unlocked their business from a business model, kind of tinkering with the business model to really create growth. So we're going to be talking about that in the next show.
And that is coming up 2 weeks from now. So if you don't already subscribe to the show, hit subscribe wherever you are listening. Michelle, anything you want to say before we go?
To echo your thanks to Omar. Thank you, Omar, so much for sharing your brilliance. And if you're out there with the podcast right now, here's to getting more monetization.
Thank you, Michelle. We want to thank you so much for listening. We love doing this show for you. We'll see you next time right here on the Content Sells Podcast. Bye for now.